In this video, we're going to talk about graphing a line using its x-intercept and its y-intercept. Here's our first question. On the grid below, that's this thing here, we're going to graph this line using its y-intercept and then its slope. This method right here, graphing with this method, is really the fastest, simplest way to graph a straight line. So this goes back to us remembering that the slope y-intercept form of a line is y equals mx plus b, and recognizing what is m and what is b. So -3/4 is m and 6 is b. And remember, b stands for y-intercept and m stands for slope. So in order to graph this line, we need to put a scale on this grid here. So I'm going to count by ones, so every spot is going to be 1 unit, but sometimes this gets a bit crowded, so what I'm going to do is I'm only going to label every second one. So I'm counting by ones, but I'm just labeling every second one so I can write my numbers a little bigger and they won't crowd into each other. Same on the negative side. Whatever scale I use on the positive x-axis, I have to use on the negative x-axis as well. So I can't change it and start counting by tens or something. Y-axis, same thing. Instead of writing every single one, which can be tedious and crowded, I'm going to erase some of those and I'm only going to put every second one on there, but I'm still counting by ones. 2, 4, 6, 8. And then -2, -4, -6, -8. So now that we have a scale, we can go back up to the original question, which is telling us to graph it using the y-intercept and then the slope. So first we're going to use the y-intercept. What is the y-intercept of this line? The y-intercept is the b value, that's the constant. That's the number that has no letter attached to it, it's a 6. So the 6 is my y-intercept. Since this is my y-axis here, I'm going to go to the y-axis to the 6 and I'm going to put a dot right there. That is the first point on my graph, y-intercept of 6. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is graph the slope. So how do we get the slope? We count out the slope. Our slope is -3/4. And that means when you're talking about rise over run, because it's a negative, we're going to fall 3 units, and then we will, that's the first number, and then we will run to the right 4 units. That's this 4. So in that order, I'm going to go back to my point here at 6, and from there I'm going to fall 3, 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to run 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to put a dot right there. So again, from your y-intercept, you fall 3. I'll show you again. 1, 2, 3. That's a fall of 3. And then I run to the right 4 units. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 units to the right. And I put a dot right there. So I'm going to erase the other stuff I put in here. And now we just get a ruler and connect the dots with a straight line. With the tablet that I use here, it's hard for me to draw a straight line. My tablet picks up the ruler instead of picking up the pen sometimes, so I'm going to try, but it's usually quite tricky. Whoops. Yeah, so it's going all over the place there. Okay, not bad. Actually, let me erase that. Okay, so took a little bump there, but that's the best I can do. You should be using a ruler, of course, and you shouldn't have a problem with that. Put an arrow at the end of the lines. The arrow at the end of the line shows me that you know this line continues on to infinity. You don't just go between your 2 dots and just draw a line here and stop. That would be incorrect. You have to draw a full line, preferably crossing both axes, cross the y-axis and cross the x-axis, and put arrows on the end. So that's the first part. The second part says estimate the x-intercept by looking at your line. So where does your line cross the x-axis? So take a look at, if you're doing this along with me, take a look at your page. Where does it cross the x-axis? Mine looks like it's crossing just a little bit ahead of 8, maybe 8.1 or something like that. It's a little bit after that. So I'm going to estimate my x-intercept is 8.1 based on my graph. Now the next thing I need to do is actually calculate the x-intercept. We already know the y-intercept. That was easy. That was in the question. The y-intercept, actually let me label it because that's our topic for today and it's important. Our y-intercept is 0, 6. What is our x-intercept? So our x-intercept, we're guessing this, but let's actually figure it out and see. Calculate the x-intercept by substituting y equals 0 into the equation. So I want to find the x-intercept by subbing in y equals 0, because along the x-axis, any point that falls right on the x-axis has no vertical movement. It has a y value of 0. So 0 equals -3/4 x plus 6. If I need to bring something over to the left side, it doesn't matter what I bring over. I will subtract 6 from both sides because I'm trying to isolate x. 0 minus 6 is -6, so I get -6 equals -3/4x. Now I'm trying to isolate x. I need to get rid of this -3/4. I'm going to do it in 2 steps here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by 4, or cross multiplying is another way of thinking of it. So what I'm really doing is I'm taking this 4 denominator and I'm multiplying it up to the 6. So by multiplying it up, 4 times -6 is -24 equals, now the 4 is gone, so we just have -3x. So that's a little easier. It's always nice to get rid of the fraction. So back that up and watch it again if you need to understand what I just did there. Now to isolate x, what do I do? How do I get rid of the -3? Do I add 3, subtract 3, divide by 3, multiply by a -3? What do I do? I have to divide both sides by a -3. These turn into a 1. -3 divided by -3 is 1. So now on the right side here, all I have is an x. But on the left side, 2 negatives make a positive, so that's going to be a positive. 24/3 is 8. So the x-intercept is actually, I'm going to label it on the graph, the x value is 8 and I subbed in 0 for y. So I was close with my estimation up here, but this is the best way to calculate it, not by estimating, because we have lots of problems when we graph. Look, I have a little bump in my graph right there and all kinds of weird things. So estimating is not the best way to go, calculating is, and that's what we're going to focus on in today's lesson, is how to get at the x-intercept and the y-intercept by substitution. So this is our last slide. Calculate the x-intercept and the y-intercept of each of the following lines. And we're going to round to the nearest tenth. Notice that these lines are not in y equals mx plus b form, so it's not like the one we just did. So these are harder to graph. We can't easily see the y-intercept, the b value. Remember in the last one I told you that the y-intercept is the constant. Well, it's not the constant when we aren't set up in this form, so the y-intercept is not 20 here. What we have to do is this algebraic process here. Let's find the x-intercept first. We want to find where this line right here is going to cross the x-axis. I want to find the x-intercept first. The way we find the x-intercept is we let y equal 0. Remember, it's always the opposite. If you're looking for the x-intercept, let y equal 0. If you're looking for the y-intercept, let x equal 0. So for the x-intercept, I let y equal 0. I'm going to go up to this equation here, and I'm going to replace the y with a 0. So I'm going to have 2x minus 5 times 0 equals 20. So that, of course, makes a 0. 2x minus 0, I'm just going to not even write it, equals 20. Divide both sides by 2 so that we can isolate x. Divide both sides by 2 and we get x equals 10. So that means I go down now here on my x-axis and I'm going to put a dot at 10. Well, I can't put a dot at 10 yet because I haven't even put my scale on. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to put on, again, I'm going to count by ones, but I'm going to label every second one. This one's really small, so I certainly don't want to label everything, every grid line this time, because I will be here all day and it'll be really small. So there's 10 is right at the edge there. That means my y-intercept is going to be, let me put it on while I'm here, my y-intercept is going, x-intercept, sorry, x-intercept is right there. X-intercept is right there, but I'm going to finish labeling my axes And I'm going to press pause to do that. So in a second you'll see the axes all labeled. So I suggest you press pause and finish labeling your grid lines as well. So there I've labeled my axes. So if you didn't press pause, now is a good time to press pause if you didn't before and fill this in. So if I assume you're doing this along with me. You have a piece of grid paper in front of you, you're making notes, and so make sure to pause the video every time you need to so that you don't fall behind and you're not trying to do your own thing while I'm explaining something different. All right, you've got your axes labeled and we've got our x-intercept on there, x of 10. Now we need to find the y-intercept of this line right here. That's what I was saying before. The y-intercept is not just the constant here because it's not 20 because we're not in y equals mx plus b form. So I have to actually calculate the y-intercept. To calculate the y-intercept, I let x equal 0. So I take my original question, but I put a 0 in for x this time. So that gives me, this is 0 here. So really I have negative 5y equals 20. I need to isolate y. I'm going to isolate y by dividing both sides by negative 5. And this gives us y, negative 5 over negative 5 is 1. Y equals negative 4. That's my y-intercept. So now I'm going to go to my y-axis, and I'm going to go down to negative 4 and put a blue dot there. Negative 4. So now I can graph the line because I can draw a line between those two dots. Right, so I actually tried to draw that line about 4 times and I couldn't get my tablet and my ruler to be friends with each other. So my line's a little bit off. It should be going right through this 10, of course, and through the negative 4. But your line is probably fantastic. So that is our first line from the x and y-intercept. Now let's try another one again together. We'll do this together and then I will get you to try this one on your own. So let's do part B together. We're going to first calculate the x-intercept and the y-intercept. To calculate the x-intercept, we let y equals 0. Take my equation, I sub in a 0 for y. Always substitute using brackets. That gives me x, 4 times 0 is 0, so that gives me x equals 6, so that was easy. X equals 6 is my x-intercept. That will go on my x-axis. Now I'll do my y-intercept. Let x equals 0 for the y-intercept, plus 4y equals 6. So that's just 4y equals 6. I need to isolate y, divide both sides by 4. We're going to get a fraction here. Y equals 6 over 4. Now we can reduce that to lower terms here, but the question does say round to the nearest tenth. So if you want to, now you can get out your calculator and do 6 divided by 4 on your calculator, and you'll get 1.5. So y equals 1.5, 1.5. So next I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to label my scale on my x-axis and my y-axis, and I'm going to pause right now and do that. I suggest you do the same. Okay, did you label your axes? Did you number it all evenly with evenly spaced intervals? I hope so. Now we're going to put these points on. The first one is x equals 6. So I'm going to go across the x-axis to the 6 and I'm going to put a dot right there. That's my x-intercept. The next point I have is y equals 1.5. So I go to my y-axis. I find 1.5, which would be just in between 1 and 2, about there. I'm going to put a dot there. And then my next step will be to draw a line connecting those two dots. And there's my second line with arrows on the end. And let's look at that instruction again. It says graph each of the lines above using only the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So this question is practice with the intercepts, which is the title for today's lesson, as opposed to graphing with the slope. We're not using the slope to graph, we're using the intercepts to graph. One more. So right here, I would like you to write that question down and calculate the x-intercept, calculate the y-intercept, and graph it. And when you come back, because you're going to press pause, when you come back, you're going to see the full solution here for you. You can check and make sure you got it right. All right, so here is what I got, x equals negative 3.3. So my x-intercept, I'll go to the x-axis and I'll go negative 3.3, kind of estimate where to put that. And then y equals negative 2. So negative 2, there will be a dot there. I just want to point out again, I know it's tedious to write all these numbers out on your axes, your scale, numbering everything. But if you don't, what will happen, I guarantee you, because I will do this too, is if you don't label your scale, you don't take the time to do that, then I can easily say, oh, you didn't label a scale, there's nothing here. So I'm going to assume you're counting by tens. These are all tens here. And if they're all tens, then your answer is wrong, because when you graph, for example, y equals negative 2, but I say, oh, I guess you're counting by tens, you haven't told me what you're counting by, so I'm going to assume you're counting by tens. Why do you have a dot there at negative 20? It shouldn't be there. You'll get it wrong. So it doesn't take long, and you can even count by fives if you wanted to, but you do have to label the scale that you're using. If you assume by not writing it, your teacher's going to assume that you're counting by ones, you're taking a big risk. So just spend the time to write it all down. So y equals negative 2, there's my y-intercept. I got x equals negative 3.3, that's kind of a weird one. That's negative 3 1/3, about there. Now I'm going to get my ruler and try to draw a line. And arrows on both ends of the line, the arrows show that your line goes on to infinity. You always draw the line further than the 2 dots, much further than the 2 dots you got here. You always continue it on. So this is the line, negative 3x minus 5y equals 10. And that's how we graph with x-intercepts and y-intercepts, and how we calculate the x-intercepts and the y-intercepts.